When you think back to the commanders in the Punic Wars, I contend the majority of people will immediately go to the famous names that defined this era with their victories. The most obvious general, of course, being Hannibal, the greatest enemy Rome ever faced, the man who survived with his army in mainland Italy for 15 years and carved his name into history with victories that displayed his tactical genius at Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and Cannae. For the Romans, we could go to the leader who defined the strategy that would frustrate Hannibal and save Rome from destruction, the dictator Fabius Maximus. Or perhaps the battle-hardened general Marcus Claudius Marcellus, who famously claimed the highest battlefield honour that a Roman could attain, the spolia opima, by defeating an opposing Gallic commander in single combat and stripping him of his arms. Most likely, though, the first Roman name would have been Scipio Africanus, a commander equally as revered for tactical ability as Hannibal himself, and the eventual vanquisher of the Carthaginian at the Battle of Zama. But for the subject of this video, I'm not interested in the overachievers and the victors of Roman history. It is a source of some curiosity for me that I have to know what exactly happened to the great losers in history. How did Rome treat its vanquished generals? Were they torn limb from limb and thrown to the dogs? Or could you recover from catastrophic defeats and claw your way back into society? As far as Roman history is concerned, disasters don't come much bigger than the omnishambles that this man was responsible for. Gaius Terentius Varro, the commander who lost the Battle of Cannae. What we know of Varro largely comes from the works of Titus Livius, better known as Livy, and his history of Rome ab urbe condita, which translates to from the founding of the city. If you like Roman history, it's one of those must-read sources up there with Caesar's history of the Gallic Wars. It's worth bearing in mind, though, that Livy was not a contemporary of these events. He may well have been writing up to 200 years afterwards. So while he is a Roman source, he is a secondary source for the Punic Wars. It would be the equivalent of me writing a book about the Napoleonic Wars in terms of years removed. There is fortunately a writer much closer to the events in the form of the Greek historian Polybius. Polybius was a hostage in Rome around the 2nd century BC. He was present at the eventual sack of Carthage, and actually worked for the descendants of the other consul who was killed at Cannae. More on that one later. Livy does provide significantly more details on Varro specifically, but there are some interesting points in Polybius' history that I will refer to as well. Varro is first mentioned in Livy's history while Livy is discussing the growing discontent with the Roman dictator Fabius Maximus. As newly elected consul, Varro steps forward to support Marcus Minucius Rufus in his opposition to the Fabian strategy. The Fabian strategy was the Roman approach to the Second Punic War that was put into effect by Fabius in response to several catastrophic losses in pitched battles against Hannibal and his armies. Instead of frontal assaults and pitched battles, Fabius aimed to disrupt and frustrate the Carthaginians with a war of attrition. The Romans would target the enemy's supply lines and only fight battles when the terrain and situation suited them. There were many opponents of this strategy in Rome, notably Fabius's own appointed lieutenant, Marcus Minucius Rufus. But back to the details on Varro. Livy also describes that Varro was a man of very humble origin for a consul. His father was described as a butcher and trader of meats, and Varro was also said to have worked in this trade as a child. He used the money left to him by his father to become a legal advocate, and his performances in the forum allowed for a route into politics. From there he climbed the ranks all the way up to the consul's chair. His consul for the year was Lucius Aemilius Paulus, who by contrast was from a great patrician family and essentially represented the nobles in the consul chair for that year. Varro's humble origins may well have been exaggerated by Livy and other sources. Livy does note it was used as political ammunition against Varro. But Livy himself also attacks Varro's political actions throughout. He describes him as having used all the tricks of a demagogue to ingratiate himself with the plebs. He also accuses Varro of using the mob's growing dislike of Fabius to cement himself as their hero by deposing the dictator. With the growing opposition to Fabius, his dictatorial powers were not extended by the Senate. On the ascension of Varro and Paulus to consuls, the Senate gave them command of a newly raised army and instructed them to engage Hannibal directly. The Battle of Cannae took place on the 2nd of August 216 BC. The background to the battle was that the consuls had heard that Hannibal, with his army, had taken a supply depot at Cannae. This panicked the Romans, especially as they had just levied 8 legions to face the Carthaginians. They marched to Cannae to force a confrontation. I could go into some detail about this battle, but to do it full justice would require an entire video to itself. Instead, I will focus on the contributions specific to Varro. Livy spends a good deal of his prelude to the battle outlining Varro's headstrong and impetuous attitude, noting that as he left Rome, he'd loudly promised the mob that he would end the war brought on by their nobles, and he would end it swiftly, unlike Fabius and the generals before him. By Livy's account, Varro went as far as to say he would finish the war the day that he caught sight of the enemy. He also relays a conversation between Fabius and the co-consul Paulus before the army is to leave Rome, where Fabius says Varro is more dangerous to the Romans than even Hannibal is. Everything that he is doing is playing exactly into Hannibal's hands, and they should go back to being cautious and suffocating Hannibal's supplies instead of seeking him in battle. Honestly, the account goes to such lengths to establish Varro's hubris that it does make you wonder how much hindsight bias was in fact affecting Livy's history, or at very least you will question the intentions behind the sources available for him back then. Polybius' account is equally unkind to Varro. It notes him as inexperienced in comparison to his co-consul. For example, prior to the first engagement, Paulus contends that they should look for more suitable ground for infantry, as the Romans hold superiority in that department and inferiority with regards to cavalry. The consuls technically held dual command, but to avoid the issue of clashing with each other, they alternated overall command on a day-by-day basis. Varro held command on the second day after they had found the enemy, and after ignoring Paulus' advice to find different terrain, engaged in skirmishes with Hannibal. They came out on top of this initial engagement, which supposedly encouraged the foolishness of Varro further. Varro's co-consul would then take command, and he would refuse to engage Hannibal despite being offered battle. The following day it was Varro's turn again, and this would be the decisive day. Typically, the standard battle formation of this era was to mass the infantry in the centre and place the cavalry on the flanks. Varro opted to strengthen the centre and try and break through there. Breaking through Hannibal's centre had previously been achieved by the Romans at the Battle of Trebia by Tiberius Sempronius Longus, although this was also a disastrous defeat for the Romans as the battle itself had been a trap. Varro's decision to aim at the centre unknowingly played entirely into Hannibal's hands. He intentionally weakened his own centre and placed heavy African infantry armed with Roman weapons on either side of his mostly Celtic centre. He also sent his Numidian cavalry to engage the Roman cavalry on the right wing, their style of fighting keeping the Roman flanks busy, while on the left his Hispanic and Gallic cavalry defeated their Roman opponents and drove them to retreat. Hannibal's weak centre meant the reinforced Roman centre advanced too far and was flanked by the heavy infantry Hannibal had placed to the sides. The Carthaginian centre maintained formation as they retreated, and the flank infantry advanced in echelon formation. Hannibal and his army had achieved a double envelopment of the Roman army, and the slaughter that followed was brutal. The Carthaginians formed a wall and began butchering every Roman soldier. The Roman army would fall to disarray and fail to maintain formation in the face of being flanked from both sides. The second consul Paulus died among the cavalry as he attempted to aid the main body of the army, slain by the Numidian and Gallic cavalry under the command of Hasdrubal, the famous brother of Hannibal. Among those who fell in the centre included the previous year's consuls Gnaeus Servilius Geminus and Marcus Attilius Regulus. Also dead was the political opponent of Fabius that Varro had supported, Marcus Minucius Rufus. Polybius puts the casualties on the Roman side at 70,000 men, while Livy is around 45,000. Historians typically favour Livy's figures, although there are some much lower estimates put forward in modern times, some as low as 15,000. To give a sense of the damage this latest defeat had done to Rome, understand that they had lost 1/5 of their adult male population in 2 years of campaigning. Their allies in Italy deserted them in the face of this defeat, most notably Rome's sister city of Capua. And abroad the Macedonian king also pledged his support to Hannibal. Back in Rome itself, there are stories that the people were resorted in their despair to human sacrifice by burying people alive in the forum so as to appease the gods. Somewhat infamously, though, Hannibal did not capitalise on the state of Rome and march on the city itself. This decision drew the quote in Livy's account where the commander of his Numidian cavalry, Mahabal, on seeing Hannibal's hesitation said, "The gods have not given all their gifts to one man. You know how to win victory, Hannibal, but you do not know how to use it." Hannibal was likely of the opinion his army would not suit a siege of Rome, and also by many historians' estimation he did not have the appropriate support from Carthage to conduct such an escalation. Back to our subject Varro, however. His last entry in Polybius' account reads as follows. A few escaped to Venusia, among them being the consul Gaius Terentius, who disgraced himself by his flight, and in his tenure of office had been most unprofitable to his country. Livy, however, details what he did next. Varro had regrouped with 4,500 men in Venusia, and with those men he transferred to Canusium, where 10,000 other troops had gathered. This at least was something approaching a consular army. According to Livy, he was also met here by military tribunes Appius Claudius and Publius Cornelius Scipio, later to become known as Scipio Africanus. Varro reforming some sort of army was important, as in Rome they were still under the impression that 2 consuls had been killed and the army completely wiped out. Varro sent a dispatch to Rome confirming the real situation. While Rome went into mourning for the lost sons and was still gripped by severe panic in general, Varro regrouping in Canusium at least gave the political leaders a foothold from which to climb out from. Livy notes the mourning period was cut to 30 days, despite nearly every family in Rome being affected. Livy's final big note on Varro's actions as consul covers his return to Rome. The Roman people thanked him for not giving up and committing suicide, instead visibly choosing to fight on. He installed a new dictator in Rome to deal with the immediate disaster, and then returned to his troops in Apulia. Despite the absolute disaster of Cannae that the Roman historians place firmly at his feet, his actions following saved some face in the eyes of the Roman population, a population that had steeled themselves facing annihilation at the hands of Hannibal. Following the end of his consul year, he took the position of proconsul. He mostly remained in Apulia with his troops. On one occasion, his army is taken over by a praetor, Valerius, to reinforce Tarentum, while he is tasked with reinforcing Picenum and levying new soldiers there. He would stay in Picenum with his legions until unrest began to brew in Arretium, and he was dispatched there to quell that. He told the Senate things were more serious than first known in the area, and the Senate ordered him to occupy the city with a legion. He seems to have settled the matter of unrest quickly and efficiently, going as far as to install new locks on the city gate when the keys could not be found originally. Most likely these were lost on purpose by agitators, according to Livy. The Senate sent him a second legion, and he would remain there throughout the year 207 BC. Varro merits 2 further mentions in Livy's history before disappearing from records. He was entrusted as part of an envoy mission in 200 BC, seeking peace in North Africa with Numidian tribes that had remained allied with the Carthaginians. They also took congratulations to the new king of the Numidians, Massinissa, who had aided them at the Battle of Zama in 202 BC. His final mention is rather fitting, as this involved his return to Venusia, the same place he had fled to following Cannae. His final mission of historical note was to help encourage the colonists and increase the population of the area following the devastation of the Second Punic War. So much to this onlooker's surprise, the mob did not tear him apart on return to Rome, nor was his career as a military leader ended by abject failure on the battlefield. It is perhaps the persistence of his career after the battle that has led historians to question whether Varro was made the scapegoat for the loss at Cannae. The main issue with regards to Varro's reputation is with the Polybius account. Polybius enjoyed the patronage of Scipio Aemilianus, who was the direct grandchild of the co-consul Aemilianus Paulus. This connection perhaps explains why the Polybius account basically reads like a defense of Paulus's reputation, at the expense of Varro. Additionally, for his history of the 3rd century, Livy largely follows the account of Polybius, of which he had access to the originals. It would be wise to assume Paulus's reputation in the events benefited from his powerful ancestors, his family merging with the Scipio family, possibly the most prominent family of the Punic Wars. And in order to protect this nobleman's reputation, his partner in command had to suffer most of the blame. Regardless of the motives of the Roman sources, if we are looking for failed Roman commanders, there are few better candidates than Varro and his comrades. Such was the magnitude of the defeat he suffered, and the decisive manner in which Hannibal crushed his legions. A victory that is still studied with awe by military strategists and historians to this day. I hope you've all enjoyed this video. Thank you for listening to me ramble on. Farewell.